In the news tonight, the UNA chief urges the Security Council to impose an arms embargo and sanctions in Syria for violations of humanitarian law, and the UN Special Envoy on Refugees pleads the Council to visit Syrian refugees. Nuclear talks between Iran and world powers are making gradual headway as diplomats work towards a June 30 deadline for a final deal. And the presumed captain of a migrant boat that sank off Libya with the loss of hundreds of lives appears before an Italian judge after prosecutors asked that he be charged with homicide and people trafficking. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriate Affairs Nasser Joudeh discussed in New York with UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon issues highlighted during yesterday's UN Security Council session chaired by His Royal Highness Crown Prince Hussein. The two officials underlined the importance of focusing on youth and empowering them to invest their potential in achieving development and progress in their countries and communities. They also stressed the need to find alternatives to prevent the youth from being recruited by terrorist organizations. Joudeh highlighted Jordanian efforts in fighting extremism and terrorism and reviewed the cooperation between Jordan and the UN in this regard. The meeting also touched on the Palestinian cause and the latest developments in Syria, Yemen, Iraq, and Libya. Also in New York, the United Nations aid chief urged the Security Council to impose an arms embargo and sanctions in Syria for violations of humanitarian law. Valerie Amos also appealed to the Council to mandate the United Nations Commission of Inquiry on Syria to specifically investigate besieged areas, the militarization of schools and hospitals, and attacks on those facilities. The United Nations says about 440,000 people are besieged in Syria's civil war, while 220,000 have been killed and an estimated 7.6 million are internally displaced. Amos asked the Council to send the perpetrators a clear message that their crimes will not go unpunished.
Send perpetrators a clear message that their crimes will not go unpunished and demonstrate to the Syrian people that there will be justice for the crimes committed against them. The High Commissioner for Human Rights has called for the situation in Syria to be referred to the International Criminal Court. And fifth, enforce an arms embargo and targeted sanctions for violations of international humanitarian law and non-respect of humanitarian imperatives.
Meanwhile, actress and special envoy of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Angelina Jolie, criticized the United Nations for its failure to act on Syria's four-year conflict as the lowest point in the world's inability to protect and defend the innocent. Speaking at the UN Security Council, she pleaded with world powers to help the millions of Syrian refugees. Jolie, who has made 11 visits to Syrian refugees in the region since the crisis began, called strongly for the political will to act.
Is not lack of information. We know in excruciating detail what is happening in Yarmouk, in Aleppo, in Homs. The problem is lack of political will. We cannot look at Syria and the evil that has arisen from the ashes of indecision and think this is not the lowest point in the world's inability to protect and defend the innocent. And while these debates are important, I also urge the Security Council to visit Syrian refugees, to see firsthand their suffering and the impact it is having on the region. Those refugees cannot come to the Council, so please, will you go to them?
Over the past 24 hours and in its continued fight against terrorism, the United States and its allies conducted 15 airstrikes against Daesh terrorist group in Syria and Iraq. The combined joint task force said 11 airstrikes in Iraq were conducted near the cities of Ramadi, Fallujah, Mosul and Tal Afar, while in Syria 4 airstrikes targeted Daesh forces near the key border town of Kobani. In Yemen, fighting between warring factions raged in southern and central parts of the country, and airstrikes hit Houthi militia forces in Aden with no fresh move towards dialogue. 15 people were killed in Ma'rib province east of the Yemeni capital as the Houthi militia and forces loyal to former President Ali Abdullah Saleh tried to advance into the rugged Sirwa district. Violent clashes also continued between the Houthis and local militias near the Khor Makassar district of Aden in Taiz and Dahala. Saudi Arabia called a meeting with major UN aid agencies and others to discuss improving aid deliveries to Yemen, which have been hindered by the naval blockade. The United Nations said the death toll from the fighting and airstrikes since the bombing started on March 26 has reached an estimated 551. Nuclear talks between Iran and 6 world powers are making good but slow progress as they work towards a June 30 deadline for a final deal. Speaking to reporters in Vienna, Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said talks were at preliminary stages and that the pace is slow but good. He said that the Europeans and Americans made good clarifications about the lifting of sanctions, adding that drafting of the text had begun. Diplomats are negotiating to fill the gaps in an April 2nd framework agreement that would curb Iran's nuclear program in return for relief from international sanctions. They need to also iron out details about the future of Iran's atomic research and development program, the exact scope of the UN atomic watchdog's monitoring regime, and what kind of uranium stockpile Tehran would be allowed to keep. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif are expected to meet next week. A U.S. drone strike in January targeting an al-Qaeda compound in Pakistan near the Afghan border inadvertently killed an American and an Italian who had been held hostage for years by the group. A statement by the White House confirmed the death of American Dr. Warren Weinstein and Italian Giovanni Loporto, who had been held hostage by al-Qaeda in a U.S. counter-terrorist operation. In the written statement, the White House expressed tremendous sorrow over the hostage deaths and said the United States had no reason to believe hostages were at the al-Qaeda-related compound targeted in the operation. Weinstein was abducted in Lahore in 2011 while working for a U.S. consulting firm, while Loporto has been missing in Pakistan since January 2012. U.S. President Barack Obama apologized and took full responsibility for all counter-terrorism operations, including this one.
As President and as Commander-in-Chief, I take full responsibility for all our counterterrorism operations, including the one that inadvertently took the lives of Warren and Giovanni. I profoundly regret what happened. On behalf of the United States government, I offer our deepest apologies to the families. As soon as we determined the cause of their deaths, I directed that the existence of this operation be declassified and disclosed publicly. I did so because the Weinstein and Loporto families deserve to know the truth. Renzi of Italy. We believed that this was an al-Qaeda compound, that no civilians were present, and that capturing these terrorists was not possible. And we do believe that the operation did take out dangerous members of al-Qaeda. What we did not know, tragically, is that al-Qaeda was hiding the presence of Warren and Giovanni in this same compound.
Former U.S. military commander and CIA Director David Petraeus was sentenced to 2 years of probation and ordered to pay a $100,000 fine after pleading guilty to mishandling classified information. The retired four-star general admitted to giving the information to his mistress, who was writing his biography. He pleaded guilty in a federal court to a misdemeanor charge of unauthorized removal and retention of classified material. The judge raised the fine from the $40,000 recommended in a plea deal, noting it needed to be higher to be punitive. Petraeus served as a top U.S. commander in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and resigned from the CIA in 2012 after it was revealed he was having an affair with his biographer.
Today marks the end of a 2.5-year ordeal that resulted from mistakes that I made. As I did in the past, I apologize to those closest to me and to many others, including those with whom I was privileged to serve in government and in the military over the years.
And an Italian judge ordered the captain and another member of the crew of a migrant boat that capsized off Libya that they remain in custody. Both men were arrested on Monday night when they arrived in Sicily with other survivors of the shipwreck. Today's preliminary hearing was intended to allow judges to establish the basic facts before a decision is taken on whether to file charges and take the case to trial. Here's more.
Prosecutors want Tunisian Mohammed Ali Malik and Syrian Mahmoud Bakit to be charged with multiple homicide and people trafficking offenses. Malik is said to have been the captain of the boat which sank off Libya last Sunday. Bakit has been identified as a crew member. Both appeared in court to face charges. The two are accused of being responsible for the deaths of up to 900 African and Bangladeshi migrants believed to have died when the boat capsized in the Mediterranean. The disaster has sparked outrage across Europe and prompted EU leaders to triple naval search missions called Operation Triton on the Mediterranean. Save the Children spokesperson Gemma Parkin says more needs to be done.
It's a case of one step forward and two steps back. Obviously, the increase of budget, the tripling of Triton's budget, and the national offers of search and rescue capacity are great breakthroughs, really critical breakthroughs. But without the clarity about Triton's operational area, then lives will continue to be risked at sea.
Meanwhile, more migrants continue to arrive. Italian officials believe the number of migrants crossing the sea could reach 200,000 this year.
Hundreds of Armenians staged memorials in Turkey to mourn their forebears killed 100 years ago and push the Turkish government to recognize what they say was a genocide by Ottoman Turks. For the first time, a senior Turkish minister joined prayers at the Armenian Patriarchate to commemorate the killing of Armenians by the Ottoman Turks in 1915. However, Turkey vehemently dismisses it was a genocide, arguing that those killed were killed in partisan fighting during the war. But on the occasion, Turkish Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu expressed his sadness over the loss of life, a major shift in tone after decades of acrimony with Armenians. A heart-melting smile from a 9-week-old baby as he hears his mother's voice for the first time after getting his first set of hearing aids. Baby Elijah Cook was born in January, but failed all his newborn hearing tests, and after consultation with audiologists, he was fitted with a hearing. A tough Champions League semi-final, depending on how you look at it. Real Madrid will face Juventus while Barcelona take on Bayern Munich, following a draw made at UEFA headquarters in Nyon, Switzerland today. Seeking their 11th title, Real will be at home in the second leg against the Italian side, who are making their first appearance in the semis for 12 years. The other tie, with the first leg in Spain, is a repeat of the 2013 semis when Bayern hammered Barcelona 7-0 on aggregate before going on to beat Borussia Dortmund to win their 5th European Cup. The semi-finals will take place on May 5th and 6th and May 12 and 13, while the final. And in the Europa League semi-finals, Fiorentina avoided an all-Italian clash as they were drawn against Sevilla, while Napoli will face Ukraine's Dnipropetrovsk. The first leg between all four clubs will take place on May 7th, with the second a week later. Fiorentina have yet to win the Europa League, while Sevilla won 3 times.
3 times winner, title holders.
Lazio, Fiorentina.
Against Fiorentina, the finalists of 19 There you see a little sign.
And finally, a quick look at the weather. Cold tonight in most regions with clouds appearing at low altitude. Tomorrow, pleasant conditions are expected as temperatures slightly rise, while winds will be southeasterly moderate. Further south, the Gulf of Aqaba can expect a relatively cold night and a very warm day tomorrow with northerly moderate winds and calm seas. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, here's a reminder of the day's top stories. The UN aid chief urges the Security Council to impose an arms embargo on sanctions in Syria for violations of humanitarian law. And the UN Special Envoy on Refugees pleads the Council to visit Syrian refugees. Nuclear talks between Iran and world powers are making gradual headway as diplomats work towards a June 30 deadline for a final deal. And the presumed captain of a migrant boat that sank off Libya with the loss of hundreds of lives appears before an Italian judge after prosecutors asked that he be charged with homicide and people trafficking. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alia Tuqan. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night and see you tomorrow.